Okay, so again, for those of you who are just arriving, welcome. Thank you for taking the time. Fall and winter cycling. I hope you found yourself in the right place. And before we get started, just wanting to invite you to take a breath, whether or not you're sitting or standing, and just finding your feet on the ground beneath you. Knowing this ground is connected to the land underneath it and around it. Noticing that with her breath, with every breath, the air that's coming in and out of your body is also generated and connected to this land. This land has been stewarded and cared for by Indigenous ancestors and peoples since time immemorial. They were the ones and are still the ones who are working tirelessly to protect this land, water, animals, and all of our surrounding ecosystems. We want to start the session today by acknowledging the true ownership of this land that we're on. Today, we're hosting this learning and sharing opportunity on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded lands and territories of the Coast Salish peoples. That includes the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And unceded means not given consent to and stolen. So as an uninvited settler myself on this land, on this stolen land, I think about my responsibilities to this land and of my responsibilities to unlearn and relearn how to be in good relationship with the land and the peoples that came before me. And I hope that this is also an invitation to all of you that has made the time to join us today, to think about your responsibilities, whether this is to research and learn about the lands, Indigenous lands and peoples that came before you, where you are and located, whether or not this is to learn and be able to pronounce the lands and the territories and the peoples correctly, and whether it's to donate your time and resources and money to supporting the Indigenous peoples and movements and organizations, artists, businesses. And I hope that this invitation goes beyond this webinar, and that goes beyond, again, the hour that we have. And certainly acknowledging for myself personally, this is an ongoing and lifelong process. With that said, we are Hub Cycling. I hope that you have heard of Hub Cycling through a lot of the different events that we've hosted throughout the years, especially well-known Bike to Work and Bike to School Week. We actually just had it. It's been kind of renamed to Go by Bike Week, and there are lots of celebration events. There are other pillars to our work that includes education, so webinars like this, as well as school-based education and community education, as well as advocacy. So we have 12 different advocacy, very much on the ground regional hubs that works with municipalities in the province to make biking better and to get more people on bikes as well. So if you are curious how to get involved and want to get to know more about Hub Cycling, bikehub.ca, lots of information there. Very quick introduction about myself. It's a bit blurry, the photo. My name is Donna, and my ancestral name you'll see on the screen here is Chen Tang Tang. I go by she, her pronouns, and I've been with Hub Cycling since 2012 in different capacities. My favorite thing has by far been a pub cycling instructor, because I really get to see a lot of the tangible on the ground change that happens. The joy on people's faces, the freedom that they feel when they're on a bike and navigating, riding on the road with the other kind of modes of transportation, and kids and families really finding that joy together, sharing that joy together. My favorite thing. So with that said, I'm hoping, very honored to be here with all of you today. I'm hoping that the information that we share today will help you become more comfortable and confident in kind of colder weather riding and commuting. So a quick question before we get started, just to have a sense or gauge who's in the room here. Okay, so what is your experience in cold weather riding? Have a feeling that, I'm going to just launch this this poll, hopefully you see it. Have a feeling that there are maybe a lot of different skill sets, lots of different experiences in the room. So if you have a moment, if you can chime in here, what is your experience in cold weather riding? Great. Okay, so just gonna hold on for another few seconds for folks to chime in. All right, looks like that's great. We got folks here who have been doing it. That's awesome to hear. We also have folks who are maybe wanting to try it for the first time. You've found the right place to do that. So this is great. So especially for those of you who already have experience doing, riding and commuting in cold weather, this is a great platform as we go through this webinar to share your experiences. Maybe there are things that we're not going to have enough time to cover. So your voice will really help quite a bit for those folks who are looking to try it for the first time. Okay. Again, something fun, okay, just to gauge where we're all at. And my apologies, the poll doesn't really reflect the fifth option, which is other, which I'm sure there are many, oops, let me just close that. There are many other reasons that people may have, but what are your current reservations for those of you who are maybe looking to try it for the first time, or who are just riding, who's tried it a few times and either gave up or weren't incentivized to continue? What are your current reservations? And hopefully this also gives all of us a sense of, a check-in with ourselves. What are some of the useful information you're hoping to take away with you today? And maybe it's all four, right? So giving you another moment before we close the poll. Okay. Let's see. All right, we got a winner here. We got a winner that definitely falling, slipping, right, on icy conditions. We're hoping that we have a couple tips for you during this webinar that will inform maybe considerations around that. And I hear all of you on the right gear being super important. And hopefully we can give you a couple shortcuts or considerations around thinking about kind of simplifying your process on preparing for cold and wet weather riding, okay? Okay, so with that said, great. Now that you have a sense of where you're all at and see where other folks are at, let's dive in. Okay, and welcome to those folks who are joining us. We haven't missed much and we're just starting. So here's a quick little overview. We're going to talk about outfitting both your bike and yourself. Okay, for fall and winter or cold weather riding, we're going to chat a little bit about some basic bike maintenance that you might want to consider during the colder months of the year. After our short Q&A, a little pause in the hour, We'll also tell you a little bit about some riding tips we find helpful for fall and winter. And last but not least, some route planning tips. Okay, we'll start with outfitting your bike. So again, a reminder that if you have any ideas and tips for folks that you found that had worked really well for you in outfitting your bike, this is a chance to chime in the chat as we share the information on our end. So some of these are going to be very straightforward for folks who have tried fall and winter or wet and cold weather cycling. Okay, number one, pretty big, get fenders. Yes, very simple. And this will really help prevent the dirt and mud from flying around and landing everywhere on you, and especially on your back. Okay, so if you don't have fenders on your bike, probably a really good idea to do that, and know that these fenders can easily be taken off in the summer months, especially if you want a lighter weight bike for the summer. Sometimes we don't think about saddle height. So especially for those of you who are trying cold weather cycling for the first time, we invite and encourage you to think about lowering your saddle a little bit, slightly, not by too much, okay? So that you are lowering your center of gravity. So the advantage of this is that it will be easier to get your feet down flat on the road. Okay, and it will probably help support a sense of safety for you, especially those of you who are especially a bit, terrified of slipping, right, and falling. So it makes it easier to, number one, to get off your bike, right, and to start off sitting in the saddle when things are slippery. So lowering your saddle tiny little bit might help. Again, straightforward. There are many ways that you can outfit your tires. I say outfit, I mean, in terms of considerations around what tires you want to have on your bike that can help ease your anxieties around cold weather riding. Number one, make sure that especially if you have wider tires, it's much better for traction. Even if you have narrower tires, rather, simply by lowering the tire pressure a tiny little bit, okay, toward the lower end of your PSI, pound per square inch, that's the unit for air pressure, you will make sure that there is more contact that your tires have with the ground, might feel a little bit steadier. Thinking about, especially if you're considering riding in snowy or icy conditions, this coming fall, winter, supposedly it's going to be a cold one, sadly, that think about tires with definitely, number one, good tread. Okay, so make sure that it hasn't completely worn out. If that is the case, change your tires, and also investing in tires with studs. So there's a plethora of examples here at the lower right hand of the different types, right, of studded tires and brands you can invest in. I've heard especially good things about the Schwalbe Marathon Winters or the Continental Nordic Spikes. Okay, so those are some considerations for you. Next up, think about having good brakes, right? This is important, meaning that you want to have brakes that work properly. And you want to make sure that, especially for those of you who have multiple bikes, or maybe you have two, right? One with what we call the rim brakes, which means that they catch the bike's rim and stops, versus disc brakes, which is this image that you see on the right. Disc brakes have much better stopping power. So if you want to pick a bike for winter riding, the one with disc brakes might be better for you as an option. Okay, it's more effective, efficient, and also has stronger stopping power a lot of times. But we do have some tips about maintaining your rim brakes a little bit later on when we talk about bike maintenance. Here's a little light disco for you. Okay, here's lots of different kinds of lights on this slide here. You can make it fun, right? So simply when it's fall and winter, cold weather riding, we all know that it's darker, it's a lot less visible probably. So you want to invest in good lights and multiple ways for you and your bike to be seen. So specifically, depending on your route, you want to consider whether you want to suit your bike up to be seen or to see, right? And sometimes those two things overlap with one another. So typically on city streets, I would say that are, I wouldn't say well lit, but somewhat lit. About 100 to about 200 lumens is a good benchmark for being seen by others. Okay, you want pedestrians, of course, drivers, right? Other cyclists be able to see you. However, especially if you have to go through a stretch of trails, for example, on your way to and from your errands or work, that may not be lit at all. So in that case, I'd say 500 or more lumens is probably something you want to invest in to be able to see the roadways in front of you clearly. Okay. So again, this means for many of you who have maybe the MEC, I know myself to have invested in some of the cheaper, more affordable MEC lights. They are not typically within the 100 to 200 lumen range. So some of the USB rechargeable ones especially falls under 100. So think about investing in multiple lights to make sure that you're either have it on your helmet, certainly on your bike, but on yourself as well. Okay. One other consideration is visibility on the side. So you'll see that on the right side of the screen, there are lots of different options for lighting your bike up from the side. So this means you can invest in spoke lights, in valve lights that plug in or wrap around your spokes or your valves. And this is life-saving. I know for a fact that a couple of friends of mine escaped a collision or was able to avoid a collision because they were lit from the side. One last tip. You see the image that it's at the top kind of middle part, the slap lit. So those are great lights. I discovered them first when I was running because they supposedly were designed for actually slapping it around your wrist or your arm or somewhere around there. And I found that actually this is really helpful for riding as well. Just, visibility kind of on your body in some ways. And of course, you can replace that with kind of reflectors and other types of things, reflective strips, right? Even, taped around your bike, all of those things. I'm sure there are lots of you who are very creative about visibility. Here are some examples of cheap, affordable solutions to light your bike up. So these I actually found at Welks. For some of you may be familiar, I love Welks. It's a store on Main Street, I think Main and 18th. Lots of goodies in there. So, again, spoke reflectors and these reflective buttons, you can slap it anywhere, everywhere, right? It keeps you visible. And I often like to keep some emergency bike lights on me just in case my regular ones run out of battery. So these are all very affordable options. Last but not least, I don't know how many of you have seen the stats, but research has been done about having lights on during the daytime, and apparently lowers the risk of collisions by 47%. So a pretty significant number, certainly worth considering, especially in the kind of grayer, darker, foggier, right, rainier seasons, to keep those lights on even during the daytime. Okay, so other things to outfit your bike with are accessories. Okay, so again, just some random images, okay, of waterproof backpacks and panniers. So specifically on here, we wanted to highlight some Canadian ones, Arco specifically, and also two-wheel gear, which is featured at the very bottom right of the slide here. These are all Canadian companies that make really good waterproof backpacks. And I know, myself, I certainly started with Ortlieb's, right? Very well known. And just in case, for those of you who are wanting to invest in local companies, those are good ones, Arco and two-wheel gear. Think about what makes you feel comfortable. So for example, if you feel actually very comfortable, rather than having panniers, instead having a backpack, right? That's worth considering, investing in a backpack that is waterproof. I am becoming more and more of a fan of handlebar bags. Okay, just something that's actually easier to reach into, get things that I need. So that's something, again, think about investing in something that's waterproof. especially if you already have gear, right? Money saving ideas here are to get waterproof covers for your bags, panniers, and such, and as well as your saddle. So the worst thing is to have a wet bum riding back home, or riding to work for that matter, riding anywhere. So I think that this may be a trick that some of you already use. I use a shower cap, gonna tuck it underneath my saddle, and it's something that means that I won't forget to bring something. Plastic bags also work, of course, right? So think about kind of waterproofing all parts of your bike to make sure your ride is comfortable. Okay, so very quickly on fall winter specific bike maintenance, and these are things that you can do hopefully on your own, or maybe with the help of a friend or a family member. So first of all, remember that I had mentioned earlier that disc brakes are more effective, powerful than rim brakes, right? For especially because they're just more efficient. They don't catch dirt and gunk and such as much. But for if you do have a bike with rim brakes, not the end of the world. All you need to do is to remember to wipe off the rims, okay? Especially if you're riding regularly in wet, cold, rainy weather, is just to wipe it off. So whether or not it's moisture, sometimes it's salt, even giving it a wash a little bit and wiping it down means that there's more chance for those brake pads to catch your rim, which will make it more effective and efficient for stopping. And of course, this should be straightforward. Make sure brake pads are actually working or that are in good condition. So especially for rim brakes, making sure that there's still grooves in your brake pads, featured right on the image on the right there. Make sure those grooves are still there. And if you can't see the grooves anymore, time to change your brake pads out or take it to shop, get them to change it for you. Okay. Don't wait for bike tires to look like the one at the bottom left corner of this slide with images. Make sure that there's still good tread that's on the tires. Okay. And again, very, very valuable investment there for yourself and for your bike. Last but not least, thinking about oiling and cleaning your bike more often in the winter. Okay, so specifically when you are riding in icy, snowy conditions, there's going to be a lot of salty and dirty water that gets into your bike's parts, which can cause erosion, damage over time, and also, of course, specifically to your chains. So whether or not it's you're washing your bike and washing your chain and then oiling it, right, regularly, that's going to really prolong, number one, your enjoyment, comfort, safety, as well as the bike parts themselves. So a general rule, you can always ask your bike shop folks, they are experts on this, but a general rule, if you're located in a region that has a dry winter, you want to use dry lubricants to oil your chain. And if it's a really wet winter, you want to use wet lubes. Okay, so again, that hopefully is straightforward, and you can always ask your bike shop folks. They are always really good at recommending these things. I wanted to just name two more things, especially in fall and winter when you're riding. Make sure, even if you don't carry a basic toolkit with you in the summer, in your other leisurely rides, try to put together a little toolkit. Okay, so just because it is going to be so much easier, and especially in those toolkit, I recommend having a compass card just in case of extreme weather. Okay, in case that you really don't want to be hovering on the sidewalk and trying to fix a thing in cold, wet weather, you can always put that onto public transit, and get it home. Okay. Last but not least, e-bikes are super popular these days. So I would recommend, if you have an e-bike, number one, make sure that you take the time to dry the battery after each ride. Okay. And hopefully, well, I mean, if you have an integrated e-battery rather than a removable one, make sure you store your bikes inside, of course. But I would recommend if it is a removable battery, remove it, okay? Take it off, wipe it, clean it, bring it over into a place where there's room temperature. It really helps to sustain the battery life for a lot longer, okay? Okay, so I'm going to dive into this next section. Again, invitation. I'm not going to pause here just yet, but an invitation to chime in on anything, tips, ideas, thoughts in the chats, especially for those of you who have experience in fall, winter, cold weather riding. If there's anything that we've missed, we haven't mentioned, please put that in the chat. So I'm going to dedicate a little bit of time to talking about outfitting yourself, okay? So not going hardcore here, okay? So think about your current skills and comfort levels. And first of all, set some realistic goals. And what we mean by that is maybe this is a short ride to the grocery store, okay? This doesn't have to be a grueling ride to perhaps work, back from work to home. This can be a weekend leisurely ride that you do with friends and or family, okay? Baby steps are really, it all builds up eventually, okay? And thinking about specifically investing on gear that will keep you comfortable. So again, there are lots of things out there. Of course, all the advertisers are going to want you to buy something. Think about, first of all, what will make your ride more comfortable in colder weather. So for myself, for example, my hands get super cold. So I really want to invest in maybe a couple pairs of gloves to layer it up, right? A thin layer and maybe a thicker layer, and with reflective tape or something creative at the back. So when I signal, people will actually see. Same thing with, dry socks. I know that sounds really easy, but oftentimes it takes a while for each one of you to think about, right? For different people, there's different needs in terms of what you need to wear, or the gears on your bike and on yourself to be comfortable. Last but not least, think about celebrating those small moments and those baby steps. Okay, and this may be a pact that you even make with folks, maybe friends or family members that you want to bring on as your cheerleaders, right? So every little trip that you make in cold weather really counts. Okay, so with that said, a few different recommendations around clothing and accessories and gear for yourself, okay? So first of all, think about layering. This is not a surprise to anybody, making sure that you invest in some good moisture absorbing inner layers. Merino wool is usually a good choice. Cotton, not so much, okay? Cotton is going to, because it doesn't wick, it actually gets really sort of smelly, number one, and also when you cool down a little bit, it gets really cold and a bit clammy, right, on the inside. So merino wool all the way. Think about investing in some breathable and waterproof outer layer, right? That's breathable, importantly, especially if it is a longer trip that you're planning to take in colder weather. One thing that I often recommend, this is, for folks who, this is kind of along the same lines of don't necessarily need to be going hardcore here right away. So even if you don't have the appropriate layers just yet, if you're riding in cold weather, just ride a little slower. So there's less sweating happening, right? So making yourself a lot more comfortable, there are creative ways to do that. Not going to read out all of these items. Of course, there are lots of different things you can invest for your head, your neck, and your body. I would say think about this specifically for yourselves. Okay, what will make you feel comfortable? I specifically really like, rain gear. Of course, there's kind of multiple piece rain gear, and there's ponchos. And for ponchos, I specifically have taken a liking to it on non-windy days because it is so much easier to put on and take off. And you see that there's an image on the right side of this hand side of this slide here, where lots of ponchos now has kind of a see-through part in the front where not only will the poncho protect you, it will protect your hands, right? So you can layer it over the handlebars, and through that clear patch, your lights can still come through. So there's visibility, but also there's protection against wetness. So ponchos, if you haven't thought of that, that's something that you may or may not want to try it out. Okay. Thinking about buying rain gears that can pack small is another consideration. So again, it's probably more of an incentive for you, right? I think that for a lot of us, we don't want to carry too many things. Certainly don't want to make work for ourselves. So any kind of rain gear that packs small, that's fairly lightweight, will be a good investment, we tend to think. So of course, we can't forget our hands and our feet, right? So lots of different kind of options here, right? Talk about hands. Yes, you see all of those S's. I often take a couple of extra pair of gloves with me just in case the ones that I'm wearing don't dry off in time, right? I want to invest in, like I said earlier, some thinner layers, maybe a thicker layer out on the outside. And also there are definitely good brands of gloves now that have visibility reflective strips, right? Color that will really help to make you visible. You want that in the winter time. You want that in the kind of colder and kind of gloomier, foggier seasons to increase your chance of being seen. I really liked this little creative project that I saw on the handlebars of Shift Delivery. These are kind of lobster claws that I think one of the co-owners, maybe grandmother, had sewn onto the handlebars, and it permanently stays there. And you just insert your hands in there. So this is something, again, for those of you who are really creative, who like to make things, something you can do, right? You can also make for your handlebars on your bike. Keeps you warm, and maybe it could be even materials that you buy specifically that's waterproof. For the feet, again, for many of us, I think there has been a shift away from covers like booties and shoe covers to actual waterproof shoes. There are some really good brands of waterproof shoes, right? Like Vessi comes to mind here. Lots of other ones. Blundstone works pretty well. Okay, but just know that there are lots of other things like, you know, thermal socks, like the one that is pictured on the kind of bottom left hand here, just covers the toes a little bit. Okay, of course, shoe covers, and now even shoe covers with kind of lights at the back for visibility. That's great. Or going old school, just bringing an extra pair of socks can also do, right? So again, up to you, what you find comfortable. Find a place to dry your rain gear wherever you go, wherever you land. Okay, so lots of workplaces I know have been investing in this, you know, whether or not it's having an end-of-trip facility with showers and lockers and dressing and changing rooms. But even if there isn't one, you know that you can certainly ask and kind of do something creative, right, around making sure you have a space to store your wet gear. You know, whether or not this is just a rack that you bring into quote unquote a workspace, or just a office sharing, maybe it's a co-working space, you know, putting maybe some wet clothes near, you know, where there's ventilation, there's kind of warm air coming through, you know, all of those things. Think about where you're going to store and dry your rain gear. And if you know that there's not going to be enough time between when you get to work and when you have to be presentable, keep you know, a set of clothes at work. Make sure you can change into or bring them. Okay. Okay, so that's a lot of talking on my end. I'm going to pause here for a moment and see if there's any questions you might have. And I unfortunately haven't been able to keep up with the chats. Great. I see that there are lots of great advice and tips on brands. Nice. Any questions so far? Or maybe Lisa, if you see any questions that popped up in the chat, if you can let me know.
The main one that hasn't been answered is where to get waterproof shoes, or particularly waterproof shoes that have stiff soles for cycling.
Yeah, good question. So yes, I see that Lindsay here asked a question. So Lindsay, I don't know if this will answer a question. I personally have been riding with Blundstones for quite a few years, and I've found them to work fairly well. I don't know if that's necessarily going to fit, you know, kind of your your style, or you know, what you need comfort wise for your feet. But I know that I don't know if they have kind of stiff toes per se, but Vessi is another one. I don't know if I spelled the name correctly or the brand correctly. Ankle flexion. Good question. I found no problem with them, but I think that you probably could, like, I'd say try them out. I mean, go. I know that, you know, you can't just try them out, meaning that you can't just wear them to go out riding in wet weather, but go to a store and maybe just try them out and see if you can try out the ankle flexion. I think that might be the best bet there. Nice. For anybody else, if you have any ideas or suggestions, feel free to also chime in. Great. Awesome. Glad. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, and if not, I'll move on and know that you always have the option to type into the chat, right? Here are any questions that you might have. Great. Okay, so some riding tips for all of us here. Okay, so especially those folks who, I hear you, I feel you in slipping and falling, right? In the winter, fall and winter riding, we have some tips for you. Okay, so before we get into that, just a reminder for all of us. Okay, so whether or not you're riding in fall and winter, or I mean all year round, you really want to specifically think about being able to meet these 4 basic needs when you're on a bike. Okay, so, and this might determine, right, ways in which you make certain decisions in riding when it's colder weather in fall and winter. So the very first need is you want to be able to fulfill your need to move. So when we say this, we mean to have enough space between yourself and another road user, whether or not it's a parked vehicle, whether or not it's a moving vehicle, right? You want to be able to have enough space to make a decision to where to maneuver, especially in an emergency situation. The second need is the need to be seen. So we invite and encourage you to think beyond being visible through lighting yourself and your bike up or wearing bright colors. Needing to be seen can also be fulfilled depending on where you position your bike in the lane. So lane positioning, where you are on the road on your bike, can also either make sure you're seen or prevent you from being seen, right? Being in other people's blind spots. The third need that you want to fulfill is to be clear. So this means that you want other people, road users, to understand what you are about to do. So there are lots of different ways to communicate clearly. Okay, so number 1, hand signals. Hopefully everyone's familiar with that. Making sure that you're left, right, stop. Can also use this hand to signal to turn right. Think about the bell on your bike, how you might want to use that. Importantly, and of course we all have it, many of us have it. If you have a voice that you can use, using your voice to be clear and to actually let people know what you're about to do on your left, for example, when you're passing them, super helpful. Okay. Last but not least, doing what's expected. So you want to make sure that people can anticipate what you're about to do and that you're staying predictable and doing exactly what's expected. So this means obeying all the rules of the road. So yes, stopping at stop signs and red lights, as much as in reality, I know that doesn't happen 100% of the time, but know that those are all things that you can do, okay, to help keep yourself and other road users safe. So with that said, think about those 4 needs as we go through some of these tips around fall and winter cycling, okay? So the very first thing that we wanted to mention is, of course, again, not a surprise that because of icy, slippery, you know, sometimes, again, just lots of gunk on the road, you know, even oil, for example, right? So when you are riding in colder weather, making sure that when you're turning, you're making slower turns. And when we say that, we mean you can stay a little bit more upright rather than what this person is doing on the image, black and white image on the right there. Oftentimes, you know, especially for roadies or folks who are pretty skilled, right, in riding, that when they're turning, they're leaning quite heavily onto the side and, you know, again, makes it faster, more efficient, but you might want to think twice about doing that in fall and winter, because the more upright you are, the more, in some ways, center of gravity wise, you're keeping that center of gravity a little bit more steady and a little lower. Okay, so really making sure that you're not leaning too much onto one side. And when in doubt, this sounds maybe a little silly. When in doubt, if you're ever unsure, you can get off your bike, exercise your superpower. And I love this because Lisa had coined this initially. You can use your superpower, turn into a pedestrian. Okay, so get off your bike, walk that block if you're unsure there's black ice, or if you're unsure if you're going to make that turn. So when it comes to signaling and braking, okay, so of course I don't know how many people can see here with the image in this photo here. The rider is taking off their right hand to signal to turn right. Okay, so this is actually what we are teaching a lot of kids in schools these days, because especially depending on the developmental stage and age that they are, many of them have a hard time differentiating left from right or left from the other left, right? So we try to ask them to point to the direction that they're turning. But when it comes to fall and winter cycling, it may not be that simple. You may, again, consider keeping your hand on the part of your brake system that will ensure when you kind of press on it that the bike is not going to flip off, or rather flip up and throw you over the handlebars. So in this case, fall and winter, this hand signal may not be as appropriate. You may want to keep your right hand on the handlebars for the most part. Most bikes that's manufactured in North America has, or Europe as well, has their rear brake, right? Back brake on the right. So you want to always make sure you have access to that, especially if you're making a turn or if you're going downhill and making a right turn specifically. So I don't know if there's any more to say about signaling and braking. Know that I think maybe the one last thing I will mention here is braking sometimes takes a little bit longer in wetter, maybe a little bit slipperier conditions. So anticipate that and anticipate braking a bit sooner than what you would normally do. So we talked a little bit about the need to be able to move and to make sure that you are seen. So this is a particular reminder for all of us. Lane positioning is really important for both of those things. So safe distance here, specifically, you want to have 1 meter beside yourself in a moving vehicle and 1 meter beside yourself and you on a bike and the curb or a parked vehicle to avoid the door zone. Okay. So especially in fall and winter, sometimes windows fog up on a motor vehicle, right? So this is especially important for you to maybe even slow down as you're passing by a parked vehicle to make sure you can see, right? At least anticipate if they had just parked, whether or not that driver is going to be opening their doors around when you're passing them, right? So keeping that meter, or maybe sometimes even more of a distance, will ensure that it prevents any risk of collision there. So lights are, of course, a huge part of this as well. But lane positioning, we really want to encourage and invite you to think about that. When there is not 1 meter of distance between yourself and moving vehicle and yourself in a parked vehicle, think about taking the lane. Okay, so I think that there is a slide specifically about that, so I'll talk about that a little bit later. Just because there is a bike lane, sometimes there is a painted bike lane, for example, that is right beside kind of a parked vehicles. Don't assume that anywhere in that painted bike lane is safe enough to ride. It really depends. Some of them are, for example, in this image here, if the person were to ride anywhere in the center or to the right of that painted bike lane, the door might have hit them, right? So these are all informed decisions you will have to make on the spot, and just know that considerations, that's sort of, you have to make that informed decision yourself. Here's a slide around taking the lane. So you do not need to see, may use full lane, the signage on the right side there, to know you have the right as a cyclist to be in the middle of the lane when there is no safe distance of 1 meter beside yourself. Okay, so this can possibly feel a bit daunting for those of you who haven't tried it. So if you do decide to, especially for fall, winter cycling, you'd rather be seen and be visible than not. Okay, and that's especially in the darker days. So I would say that practice this in smaller residential streets, for example, maybe with a friend who feels a little bit more comfortable or confident than you are. The more that you're comfortable with taking the lane, the more visible in the darker days you will be likely with in front of a car or behind a car. Here is a seemingly complicated graph. It's just a graph, but the point we're trying to make here is that gears matter. Okay, what kind of gears or how hard or easy you're making your bike does matter in fall and winter, especially when it comes to making sure that you're, number one, paying attention to your body, right? How easeful it is when you're riding, but as well as those gears on your bikes. So specifically, all we're trying to say here is to try to have your chain straight. So for example, typically a bike, a conventional commuter bike has 3 chain rings in the back. Sometimes now many bikes actually make them with 2, okay? Sometimes 1, of course, a single speed, sometimes. In the back, in the rear, so depending on how many gears there are, so in this graphic specifically, there are 7 of them altogether. You really want to use them so that the chain is somewhat straight. So if you're using the smallest chain ring in the front, you might want to stick with the 1, 2, and 3 gears in the back. So you can see how that creates somewhat of a straighter line. And if you're using the middle chain ring in the front, you want to use maybe 3, 4, and 5, right? This is not a rule. This is simply something for you to consider, because the more kind of slanted your chain ring is, and especially if you're constantly changing them, for example, and they're not keeping straight, that really can wear and tear on your gears and make it a little bit less efficient. Other things quickly mentioning for debris and slippery surfaces. So there are especially a few things you might want to keep in mind. I don't think this is a surprise to anybody. Piles of leaves are slippery. There's the slippery crates, for example, and manhole covers. One thing that people aren't as aware of are those painted white lines, actually. So you can see that in the middle image here, even though, yes, they're meant to be there for visibility, for, actually kind of roadway directing, right, like signage purposes, sometimes they can be slippery. So really paying attention to that, either slowing down a little bit, making sure you're paying attention can really help. Also, when you're going through a puddle, sometimes puddles can hide potholes. So really making sure you're slowing down there can really prevent any kind of incident from happening. Last but not least, if you are finding yourself traveling across train tracks, know that for many of you, this may be old news, know that 90-degree angles will help prevent you from slipping and getting stuck in those train tracks quite a bit. I've suffered this myself, especially on Granville Island. I remembered on a really wet, rainy day, not paying too much attention and slipped and fell right around when I was going over the train tracks. So that's just something, you can pay attention to and avoid. Quickly around route planning for fall and winter. So you'll see here that there's what we call AAA facilities. AAA stands for all ages and abilities. You'll see, according to research, there are specific bike infrastructure that's suitable for all ages and abilities riding. And these are preferred, as well as it's actually, according to research, it's safer as well, right? So for example, local street bikeway, this is a picture of Ontario bike lane, protected bikeway, right? Could be Dunsmuir, Hornby, if you're familiar with those. It's separated from motor vehicle traffic, or off-street pathway. So this is a picture of the seawall, right? So again, that's great, but knowing that in fall and winter, those may not be the first ones to get cleared, especially after a snowfall, after a windstorm, for example. So those are the times that you may even think about, and this is why learning how to, quote unquote, take the lane or how to navigate, right, some of these infrastructures that are potentially not suited for all ages and abilities, but actually can keep you safer in cold and wet weathers when you're riding. Because sometimes major streets with painted bicycle lanes and buffered bicycle lanes gets cleared first. So do your research, think about the neighborhoods that you're in, think about your route to and from the destination, and plan that out accordingly. Weigh kind of the benefits and the disadvantages for both. Okay, I'm aware of time. I wanted to make sure that there's some time at the end to answer your questions. If there's any, just want to quickly go over some multimodal transportation. As I mentioned earlier, a compass card is quite handy when it comes to cold and wet weather riding. So know that there are lots of different ways you can combine cycling with other public transportation. Lots of this information is on TransLink's website, of course. Not gonna go into detail about this. Know that there is a really useful regional cycling map that just came out in January of this year. I have a paper copy here. It folds out quite big. There's also a PDF version of this on the TransLink's website that you can download. And it really, I think the last version was 2012. So this is quite a significant update that also is connecting quite a lot of different municipalities as well, with newer or filling the gaps. Okay. Not going to talk too much about this. Just know that there's, of course, guidelines, limitations around when you can take your bikes on transit. Okay. Specifically, especially if you have an e-bike, know that e-bikes are now allowed on buses. This is newer, came out last year, but know that there's also some limitations. It has to weigh less than 55 pounds when you're putting it on to the bus bike rack. The wheels, of course, have to fit properly, all of those things, okay? So especially when you haven't practice or you don't really know how to put your bike on the bus or your e-bike on the bus, a good way to practice this and to find out, number one, is to Google Translinks, there are a couple of videos online that you can watch and just get a sense of how this is done. Most importantly, I find it's really helpful learning by doing. So there are 5, this slide has not been updated, but there are 5 different demo stations all across Metro Vancouver. There are 2 in Vancouver, one at Main Street Sandsville, just outside of the SkyTrain station, one at the Vancouver City Hall. Okay, one in North Vancouver at City of North Vancouver City Hall Plaza, one at Production Way University, just outside of the SkyTrain station, and another one at, I believe, at Moody Station. It's in Port Moody, one of the stations. Don't quote me on it, but this is going to be information we send to you as part of a follow-up email, so you have all of this information with you handy. Okay, so again, if you don't live anywhere close to any of these demo stations, think about the closest bus depot near you. You can just wheel your bike over, ask them if you can try it out. Bus driver waiting for their next shift. Usually they're really gracious about it because they want you to do it right when it's in real time. Okay, so something for you to consider. Okay, so I'm going to pause here again. Questions? Oh, great. And I see it just opened up the chat. There's a demo station at BCIT's Burnaby campus. Perfect. I see that they're growing. Anything else questions-wise? Is there anything that I've missed, Lisa, questions-wise in the chat? I'm not sure if I see any.
I think we've got everything answered
Great.
in the chat already.
Awesome.
Unless I missed one, but I think that's it.
Awesome. And feel free to also unmute yourself and chime in if there's anything that you want to ask in voice as well. Okay. Pause here for a moment.
Hi, this is Lindsay.
Hi, Lindsay.
Hi, I know we're supposed to wipe our rims, especially if we have like the caliper, the rim brakes, and our chain, etc. down. If we're in a bit of a rush, like, are these things that we should be doing every time we get off the bike for a ride when it's raining, or how often should we be cleaning our chain when it's raining a lot? Are there general guidelines in terms of number of kilometers type of thing?
Yeah, good question. I would say, so yeah, that's a good, I would say instead of kilometers, it's about how heavy and what is kind of how frequently you're riding. So for example, I don't know if this will answer a question. For example, if I'm riding every day or most of the days in the week, and those days that I was riding for the most part had been wet, I would say clean and oil your chain on a weekly basis if you're riding so regularly. But if it's just a couple of days a week that you're riding and didn't rain very much, I would say 2-3 weeks, somewhere around there. I think the one thing that I would really recommend is, especially if you are riding in kind of snowy, icy conditions, or there's a lot of kind of wet snow, for example, then try to take care of your chain. Look at it, of course, take care of your chain a little bit more on a regular basis, because sometimes it can, like, there's salty, gritty stuff that can get stuck on your chain and that can actually erode it over time. I don't know if that answers your question. There isn't really a, I would say, a kilometer barometer for me personally, but maybe, I don't know, I'm going to extend this question to Lisa. Lisa, do you have a kind of a parameter around this on yours?
No, I don't, because I was thinking it really depends on your bike and how much water and how far you're riding. And like one of our bikes has a full chain case, so the chain doesn't really even get that wet. Things like that would affect it. Whether your chain gets to dry out completely, you know, if it's parked, say, in a warm garage, like, so many things can affect it. So it's pretty hard to give a standard. I would just go by, you know, if it looks dirty, if it looks like it needs cleaning or it's not oiled anymore. Hopefully it doesn't get to the point where it's squeaking, but definitely needs oil if it's squeaking.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Lindsay. Did that help answer or clarify anything? I hope so.
Yeah, I think so. And I'll just have to play around in terms of how it fares staying wet so often.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say that depending on your bike and depending on, it's something that you can also take it to a shop. And again, thinking about asking them the type of lube that you might want to use, like they're usually a really good help on that.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm just very mindful of time and I want to make sure that we can wrap this on time for all of you. Just a couple quick things before we wrap this up. And again, as I'm talking, please feel free to add in any other questions you may have in the chat. Okay, so just wanting to extend a few resources to you, and these again will be sent to you in a follow-up email. So you'll have the link, whether or not for yourself or maybe for a loved one that you want to share with. There are a couple courses online that Hub has put together that can be really helpful in kind of learning with loved ones and yourself and your family about just familiarizing with rules of the road. And for some of you, maybe it's a refresher. There's one specifically tailored toward 9 to 12-year-olds to learn to ride online. Not that the curriculum itself isn't appropriate for all ages, kids of all ages, literally. Okay, so just know that's there. And the other one, Streetwise Cycling, is more tailored towards adults. Certainly you can do this with your family or entire family as well. Lots of good images and visuals that will help hopefully clarify rules of the road for you. Okay. This is something I'm quite excited about. Thank you to all of you who are members of Hub. And I don't know how many of you have heard, but right now we're actually running a campaign on joining Hub as a lifelong member for just $10. So this, not only is this going to be, sort of supporting a lot of the smaller bike businesses all across the Lower Mainland. It also really helps in gathering voice and advocacy for getting more people on bikes and also creating safer and more connected cycling networks. So if this is something that you have the capacity financially for, I highly recommend that you check this out. And I don't know if this will be a link that will be shared with you in a follow-up email, but something that will also get you discounts in bike repairs and purchasing new bikes and other bike parts, and also car sharing and bike sharing minutes and all different kinds of rides. Okay, so last but not least, thank you for taking the time to join us today. I know it's already cutting into dinner time, so thank you to all of you who have stayed until the very end. There will be a follow-up email in there. Like I said, there will be resources as well. There will be a feedback survey. It takes a couple minutes. If you can help us fill that out and tell us what you liked or needed more of in this workshop or in other workshops or for other kinds of information and webinars, that would be really helpful for us to know as well. Okay, so with that said, I am going to stop sharing and just wanting to thank you again for joining us today. And I hope that this information has been helpful, and some of the chats and the information that you've all shared in the chats, resources have been helpful to all of you as well. And we hope to see you again at one of our webinars or on the road. Thank you so much to everybody. Thank you. Thank you.